443 million years ago, Earth was not the world we know today. The continents were shifting. Shallow seas covered vast stretches of the planet. Life on land was still fragile, simple and limited. But beneath the surface of the oceans, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. This was a world recovering from disaster. A major extinction had wiped out huge numbers of species, leaving ecosystems broken and unstable. But slowly, over millions of years, life began to return. Coral reefs expanded through warm tropical waters. Strange invertebrates crawled across the seafloor, and among them, early fish began to spread, evolve, and take on new forms. Between 443 million and 419 million years ago, Earth entered a period of recovery, change, and quiet transformation. It was a time when the oceans grew richer, life became more complex, and the foundations were laid for the world that would eventually come after. The Silurian Period is one of the important parts of Earth's long natural history, and it belongs to the deep past when life was still developing in simple and changing forms across oceans and early land areas. This period took place after a major global recovery phase following one of the largest known extinction events in early Earth history. It began about 443 million years ago and ended about 419 million years ago. During this time, Earth continued to change in its environment, climate, oceans and living organisms, shaping conditions that would later support more complex ecosystems. Silurian Period is part of the Paleozoic era, a long stretch of geological time when marine life was the dominant form of life on the planet. It followed the Ordovician period and came before the Devonian period. The transition into the Silurian came after a major extinction event known as the Late Ordovician mass extinction, which affected a large portion of marine species and changed the structure of ocean life significantly. This extinction event is one of the most important turning points in early biological history because it reduced many groups of organisms and opened ecological space for surviving and newly evolving life forms. Late Ordovician mass extinction played a major role in shaping the beginning of the Silurian world. Many marine species, especially those living in shallow seas, were reduced in number or completely disappeared. The oceans after this event were less crowded in terms of species diversity, which allowed surviving organisms to expand into new habitats and develop new forms over time. This change created conditions where marine ecosystems could slowly rebuild and reorganize themselves. During the Silurian, the planet Earth had a warm climate overall with rising sea levels compared to earlier times. Large areas of the continents were covered by shallow seas, creating wide environments where marine life could spread. These shallow seas were especially important because they provided stable conditions for organisms to live, feed, and reproduce. The distribution of land and sea was also different from today, with continents arranged in different positions and sizes, and large portions of land being located near the equator or in warm regions. The oceans of the Silurian were filled with life that was slowly recovering and diversifying after the extinction event at the end of the Ordovician. Many groups of marine organisms survived into the Silurian, and they gradually increased in variety and complexity. Among the most common marine organisms were brachiopods, which are shell-bearing animals that lived on the seafloor. These organisms were widespread and played an important role in marine ecosystems by filtering food particles from the water. Coral reefs also began to expand during this period. Early coral-like organisms started forming reef structures in shallow marine environments. These reefs provided shelter and food for many other marine species. The development of reef systems helped increase biodiversity because they created complex habitats where different organisms could live together. These reef environments became important centers of marine life and continued to develop further in later geological periods. Another important group of marine organisms during the Silurian were trilobites, which were arthropods with segmented bodies and hard outer shells. Trilobites had already existed for a long time before the Silurian, but they continued to evolve and adapt to changing environments. They lived on the seafloor and sometimes burrowed into sediment or moved across the ocean floor in search of food. Their presence is well documented through fossils found in many parts of the world, showing their wide distribution in ancient oceans. Graptolites were also present in Silurian oceans. These were small colonial organisms that often floated in the water column. They are important in geological studies because their fossil remains are useful for dating rock layers from this period. Their distribution across ancient seas makes them valuable indicators of environmental changes and time periods in Earth's history. The Silurian oceans also contained early jawed and jawless fish. One of the most important developments in this period was the appearance and early diversification of fish with more complex body structures. Jawless fish had been present earlier, but during the Silurian, early forms of jawed fish began to appear. This development was significant because jaws allowed organisms to feed on a wider variety of food sources, which influenced their survival and evolution. These early fish lived in both shallow coastal waters and deeper marine environments. At the same time, the Silurian period also marked an important stage in the movement of life from water to land. Although most life was still in the oceans, the first signs of more complex life on land began to appear. Simple plants started to spread across damp environments near shorelines, riverbanks, and floodplains. These early plants were small and simple in structure, lacking roots, leaves, and complex vascular systems like modern plants. However, they were among the first organisms to begin adapting to life outside water. These early land plants helped change the surface of the continents over time. They contributed to soil formation by breaking down rocks and adding organic material. This process slowly changed the landscape and made it more suitable for other forms of life to later move onto land. The spread of plants also influenced the atmosphere by beginning to affect the levels of gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen. Although these changes were gradual and developed over long periods, the climate during the Silurian was generally stable and warm compared to some earlier periods. There were no large polar ice sheets for most of the time, and sea levels were relatively high. Warm conditions allowed marine life to spread widely across shallow seas that covered many continental areas. These conditions supported continuous biological activity and long-term ecological development in marine environments. The arrangement of continents during this time was different from the modern world. Large landmasses were located in different positions, and many were partially submerged under shallow seas. These continental arrangements influenced ocean currents, climate patterns, and the distribution of marine habitats. Over time, movement of the Earth's crust slowly changed the positions of continents, but during the Silurian, these changes were gradual and not as rapid as in later geological periods. Sedimentary rocks formed during the Silurian provide important information about the environment of that time. These rocks often contain fossils of marine organisms, showing how life was distributed in ancient seas. Limestone deposits are common from this period, especially in regions that were once covered by shallow, warm seas. These rocks formed from the accumulation of calcium-rich materials from marine organisms such as corals and shell-bearing animals. Reefs continued to expand in Silurian seas, with early coral groups playing a major role in building reef structures. These reefs were not identical to modern coral reefs, but served similar ecological functions by providing habitats for many marine species. The growth of reefs contributed to increasing biological diversity in marine environments, as different organisms adapted to living among reef structures. Silurian ecosystems were interconnected in ways that allowed energy and nutrients to circulate through marine environments. Primary producers such as simple algae formed the base of the food chain. These organisms use sunlight to produce energy through photosynthesis. They were consumed by small marine animals, which were in turn eaten by larger predators. This structure supported a variety of feeding relationships in ocean ecosystems. Sea levels during this time experienced changes that influenced marine habitats. Rising and falling sea levels affected the size of shallow seas and the distribution of marine environments. These changes created new habitats while also reducing others, leading to shifts in where organisms could live. Species that were adaptable to changing conditions were more likely to survive and spread across different regions. In some regions, evaporate deposits formed due to the evaporation of seawater in restricted basins. These deposits indicate periods where water circulation was limited and evaporation rates were high. Such geological features provide evidence of climate conditions and environmental processes during the Silurian. The development of early vascular plants during the later part of the Silurian was another major step in the history of life on land. These plants had structures that allowed them to transport water and nutrients more efficiently than earlier forms. This adaptation helped them grow in slightly drier environments and expand beyond very wet coastal areas. Their spread laid the foundation for more complex land ecosystems in later periods. As plant life slowly expanded on land, it also began to influence weathering processes. Rocks were broken down more efficiently due to biological activity, which increased the formation of soils. This interaction between living organisms and the physical environment played an important role in shaping Earth's surface over long periods. Marine predators during the Silurian included early fish species that developed improved movement and feeding abilities. These organisms played a role in shaping marine food webs by influencing the populations of smaller organisms. The presence of predators contributed to evolutionary changes in prey species, encouraging adaptations for survival such as better movement and protective structures. Fossil evidence from Silurian rocks has allowed scientists to reconstruct details about life during this period. These fossils include remains of marine shells, coral structures, fish bones, and impressions of early plants. By studying these remains, scientists can understand how ecosystems were structured and how organisms interacted with each other and their environment. The Silurian also shows evidence of stable, long-term environmental recovery following the major extinction event that preceded it. Ecosystems gradually regained complexity as new species evolved and existing groups diversified. This recovery process was not immediate but occurred over millions of years, with gradual increases in biodiversity and ecological stability. Ocean chemistry during the Silurian also influenced life development. Levels of oxygen in shallow seas supported marine organisms, while nutrient availability affected the growth of algae and other primary producers. Changes in ocean chemistry over time influenced where different species could live and how they evolved. Tectonic activity during this period contributed to the formation of mountain ranges and changes in continental structure. These geological processes affected sea levels and created new environments for life to inhabit. Tectonic activity during this period contributed to the formation of mountain ranges and changes in continental structure. These geological processes affected sea levels and created new environments for life to inhabit. The movement of Earth's crust played a continuous role in shaping both land and ocean environments. Silurian ecosystems were characterized by gradual expansion of life into new ecological roles. Marine life became more diverse, and early land ecosystems began to form. These developments occurred over long periods of time and were influenced by environmental stability, climate conditions, and biological adaptation. Throughout this period, Earth continued to experience slow but important changes in both its physical structure and living systems. The interaction between oceans, land, atmosphere, and life forms created a dynamic system that evolved continuously. The Silurian period is a division of Earth's long history that belongs to the Paleozoic era. It is placed in a time range that extends from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. This time range describes a very long span in which Earth continued to develop through natural geological processes. The period is identified through careful study of rock layers, fossil remains, and radiometric dating methods that allow scientists to estimate ages of ancient Earth materials. These methods help place the Silurian period within a clear position in the timeline of Earth's history. The starting point of the Silurian period is marked at about 444 million years ago. This point is identified through changes in fossil records and changes in rock formations found in different parts of the world. The ending point is placed at about 419 million years ago, also determined through evidence preserved in rocks and fossil layers. The full time range between these 2 points represents a long stretch of geological time in which Earth experienced steady changes in land, oceans, and living organisms. During this time range, Earth's surface continued to shift due to movements within the crust. These movements are recorded in layers of sedimentary rock that formed in oceans, shallow seas, and other water environments. These rock layers preserve traces of organisms that lived during the Silurian period. Fossils found in these layers include marine life forms that were common in ocean environments. These fossils help establish the timeline and confirm the placement of the Silurian period within Earth's history. The time range from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago is part of a broader system used to divide geological time. This system includes eons, eras, periods, and smaller subdivisions. The Silurian period is placed within the Paleozoic era, which contains several other periods. Each of these divisions is based on changes in rock layers and fossil content. The Silurian period is identified by specific fossil groups that appear in rocks formed during this time range. The beginning of the Silurian period is associated with a boundary in the geological record. This boundary is recognized in rock layers that contain evidence of major environmental changes. These changes are observed in fossil types and in chemical signals preserved in sediments. Scientists use these signals to determine where one geological period ends and another begins. The Silurian period begins after the end of the Ordovician period, and this transition is recorded in rocks that show shifts in life forms and environmental conditions. The ending point of the Silurian period is also defined by a boundary in rock layers. This boundary is marked by changes in fossil types and sediment characteristics. These changes show a transition into the next geological period. The rocks formed at this time contain evidence of evolving ecosystems and changing environments. These rock layers are studied in many regions of the world to confirm the timing of the Silurian period's end. The entire time range of the Silurian period is studied through stratigraphy, which is the study of rock layers and their arrangement. Each layer of rock represents a period of time in Earth's history. Layers formed during the Silurian period contain specific fossil types that help identify them. These fossils include marine organisms that lived in ocean environments that covered large areas of Earth's surface. The presence of these fossils helps define the time range of the period. Radiometric dating is another method used to confirm the age of Silurian rocks. This method measures the decay of radioactive elements in minerals found in ancient rocks. By measuring this decay, scientists can estimate the age of rocks that formed during the Silurian period. These measurements support the time range from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. The results from different regions are used together to build a consistent timeline. The Silurian period took place during a time when Earth's continents were arranged differently from their current positions. These landmasses were positioned in ways that influenced ocean circulation and the distribution of marine environments. Large areas of shallow seas covered parts of the continents. These seas provided environments where marine life forms lived and left behind fossils. The sediments deposited in these seas formed rock layers that preserve the record of the Silurian time range. The fossil record from the Silurian period includes a wide range of marine organisms. These organisms are found in rock layers that correspond to different parts of the time range. The distribution of fossils helps scientists understand how life was spread across Earth during this period. Fossils are preserved in limestone, shale, and other sedimentary rocks that formed in ocean and nearshore environments. Each layer of rock represents a specific interval within the Silurian time range. The beginning of the Silurian period is identified by a significant change in fossil communities. This change is recorded in marine sediments that show shifts in the types of organisms present. These shifts are used to define the start of the period at about 444 million years ago. The rock layers that mark this boundary are studied in multiple locations to confirm the timing. As time continued through the Silurian period, sediment accumulation in ocean basins and shallow seas continued. These sediments formed layers that preserve a detailed record of environmental conditions. The time range from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago includes continuous deposition of these sediments. Each layer reflects conditions at the time of its formation, including the presence of marine organisms and the chemical composition of seawater. The chemical composition of ocean water during the Silurian period is preserved in some rock formations. These chemical signals include traces of elements that were present in seawater at the time of sediment deposition. These signals help confirm the age of the rocks and support the established time range. The study of these chemical markers is part of geochemistry, which is used to understand ancient Earth conditions. The Silurian period also includes evidence of changes in sea levels recorded in sedimentary rocks. These changes are identified through patterns in rock layers that show repeated cycles of sediment deposition. These cycles are found in rocks formed within the time range of about 444 million to about 419 million years ago. The patterns are preserved in sequences of limestone, sandstone, and shale that were deposited in marine environments. Fossils found in Silurian rock layers include organisms with hard shells and skeletal structures. These structures allowed for better preservation in sediments. The presence of these fossils helps establish the age of the rock layers and confirms their placement within the Silurian time range. The fossils are studied in different regions where Silurian rocks are exposed at the surface. The time range of the Silurian period is also confirmed through correlation of rock layers from different parts of the world. Correlation involves matching rock layers based on fossil content and chemical signatures. This process allows scientists to align rock sequences from different locations and confirm that they belong to the same time interval. The Silurian period is recognized in this way across many continents. The beginning of the Silurian period marks a point where Earth continued its geological development after earlier changes in life and environment. The rocks formed at this time show a transition in fossil content that defines the lower boundary of the period. This boundary is placed at about 444 million years ago, based on consistent evidence from multiple sites. The ending of the Silurian period marks another transition recorded in rock layers. This transition is identified by changes in fossil communities and sediment characteristics. The boundary is placed at about 419 million years ago. Rocks formed after this point belong to the next geological period in the Paleozoic sequence. The full time range between these two boundaries is preserved in rock formations across many regions of Earth. These formations include sequences of marine sediments that were deposited continuously over millions of years. The study of these rock sequences provides detailed information about the timing of the Silurian period. The fossil record within this time range shows continuity in marine life forms across different regions. These fossils are preserved in layers that correspond to specific intervals within the Silurian period. The distribution of these fossils helps confirm the duration of the period from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. Sedimentary rocks formed during this time range often contain layers that represent repeated environmental conditions. These layers are studied to understand the sequence of deposition during the Silurian period. The arrangement of these layers provides a record of time that is used to define the boundaries of the period. The Silurian period is placed within a long sequence of geological time that is constructed from rock evidence and fossil records. The time range of about 444 million to about 419 million years ago is established through multiple lines of evidence that include stratigraphy, radiometric dating, fossil correlation, and geochemical analysis. These methods together provide a consistent framework for understanding this interval of Earth's history. The rocks formed during this time range continue to be studied in many regions where they are exposed at the surface. These studies add more detail to the understanding of the Silurian period and confirm its placement within the geological timeline. The preserved records within these rocks maintain information about the conditions that existed during the full duration of the Silurian time range. After the major ecological disruption that affected life during the final stage of the Ordovician time span, the living world on Earth entered a long period of rebuilding and expansion that unfolded across seas, shallow marine regions, and early coastal environments. This rebuilding involved many forms of life that had already existed before the disruption, along with new forms that began to appear and spread into different ecological settings. The conditions in the oceans changed in ways that allowed organisms to occupy spaces that had been left open, and these spaces became regions where living systems could re-establish themselves gradually across long intervals of geological time. In the early phase of this recovery, marine environments carried the main record of biological activity. Many organisms that survived the end of the Ordovician time interval continued their existence and began to occupy available habitats that were present in shallow waters. These habitats included areas of continental shelves, shallow seas, and regions where sediments accumulated over long periods. The organisms involved in this early recovery included brachiopods, bryozoans, trilobites, mollusks, echinoderms, and early forms of coral-like structures. Each of these groups contributed to the rebuilding of ecological systems through their feeding activities, reproductive cycles, and interactions with surrounding water conditions. Brachiopods maintained a strong presence in many marine settings, attaching themselves to surfaces on the seafloor and filtering microscopic food particles from surrounding water. Their shells accumulated in sediment layers, forming part of the physical record of life activity during this recovery interval. Bryozoans formed colonial structures that spread across available surfaces, producing layered growth patterns that covered parts of submerged rocks and other solid foundations. Trilobites continued their presence in marine sediments, moving across the seafloor and interacting with organic material present within sediment layers. Mollusks, including early forms of gastropods and bivalves, expanded into different marine zones. Gastropods moved across surfaces of sediments and rocks while feeding on available organic material. Bivalves remained partially buried within sediments or attached to surfaces, filtering water for nourishment. Their shells also contributed to sediment accumulation, creating layered deposits over long spans of time. Echinoderms, including early relatives of star-shaped and disc-shaped forms, occupied seafloor environments and participated in the distribution of nutrients within marine ecosystems. Their body structures allowed interaction with sediment surfaces and water currents, influencing the movement of organic particles in their surroundings. Coral-like organisms began to establish early reef structures in certain regions of shallow seas. These structures developed through repeated growth and accumulation of skeletal material, forming habitats that supported additional forms of marine life. During this recovery phase, microbial life also played a significant role. Microorganisms existed in water columns and sediment layers, processing organic material and contributing to nutrient cycles within marine environments. Their activity supported the availability of chemical elements necessary for the growth of larger organisms. The interaction between microbial systems and larger marine organisms formed a continuous cycle of material exchange that supported ecological rebuilding. As time continued, marine ecosystems became more structured through the repeated interaction of organisms with their environment. Sediment layers accumulated across seafloors, and these layers contained remains of living organisms along with mineral deposits. Water movement through shallow seas distributed nutrients and allowed organisms to expand their presence into new regions. The distribution of oxygen within marine waters influenced the placement of many organisms, as certain groups occupied areas where oxygen availability supported their biological activity. In the early stages of recovery, the arrangement of marine communities showed a gradual expansion of living activity into different ecological zones. Organisms that had survived earlier disruptions began to occupy a wider range of environments. Some groups remained attached to surfaces, while others moved freely across sediment layers or through water columns. Feeding activity included filtration of particles from water, grazing on organic surfaces, and scavenging of material present in sediment deposits. The development of early coral-like communities marked an important stage in marine recovery. These communities formed through repeated deposition of skeletal material by small organisms living in colonies. Over long intervals, these deposits accumulated into structures that provided physical surfaces for additional organisms. These structures influenced water flow in surrounding areas and created regions where diverse marine life could exist together within shared environments. Trilobites continued to occupy many marine habitats, showing a variety of body forms adapted to movement across sea floors. Some trilobites moved through sediment layers, while others remained on open surfaces. Their presence in fossil deposits provides evidence of their distribution across different marine regions during this recovery period. Their exoskeletons contributed to sediment composition after their life cycles ended, adding to the layered structure of marine deposits. Brachiopods maintained widespread distribution across shallow marine environments. Their attachment to solid surfaces allowed them to remain in place while filtering water for nutrients. Their shell structures varied in shape and size, reflecting differences in their ecological roles within marine systems. These shells accumulated in large numbers in some sediment layers, forming dense deposits that indicate sustained biological presence. Bryozoans formed colonies that expanded across available surfaces, producing branching and encrusting patterns. These colonies created living layers that interacted with water flow and sediment deposition. These structures formed by bryozoans provided surfaces for attachment by other organisms, contributing to the development of complex marine habitats. Mollusks continued to diversify within marine environments. Gastropods moved across surfaces using muscular foot structures, feeding on organic material present on sediment surfaces and rock formations. Bivalves remained partially buried or attached, filtering water and contributing to nutrient cycling within marine systems. Their shells contributed to sediment formation after death, becoming part of the layered deposits found in ancient seafloor regions. Echinoderms occupied various positions on the seafloor, with body structures adapted to interaction with surrounding sediments. Their feeding activities involved the collection of organic particles, contributing to the redistribution of nutrients within marine ecosystems. Some echinoderms developed structures that allowed them to anchor themselves to surfaces, while others moved slowly across sediment layers. Microbial communities remained active throughout these marine environments, processing organic material and supporting chemical cycles necessary for life. Their presence influenced sediment composition and contributed to the breakdown of organic matter. These processes allowed nutrients to remain available for larger organisms over extended periods of time. As marine environments continued to develop, sediment layers became increasingly complex due to the accumulation of biological material. Shells, skeletal fragments, and organic remains formed part of these layers. Water movement through these sediments allowed chemical exchange between layers, supporting continued biological activity in surrounding environments. Oxygen distribution within marine waters influenced the placement of many organisms. Areas with suitable oxygen conditions supported dense populations of brachiopods, mollusks, and other marine organisms. Regions with different chemical conditions supported microbial communities, and specialized organisms adapted to those environments. The expansion of reef-like structures created new physical spaces within marine ecosystems. These structures formed through repeated deposition of skeletal material and provided surfaces for attachment by various organisms. Over time, these reef-like formations became part of larger sedimentary systems, influencing the arrangement of marine habitats across broad regions. Trilobite populations continued to occupy different ecological roles within marine systems. Some moved through sediment layers, while others occupied open surfaces. Their distribution across marine environments reflects their ability to adapt to changing conditions within the recovery interval. Their fossilized remains appear in many sediment layers, indicating sustained presence across long geological periods. Brachiopods remained a central component of marine ecosystems, with their shell structures forming part of the physical environment on the seafloor. Their feeding systems allowed continuous interaction with water currents, contributing to nutrient flow within marine systems. Their accumulation in sediment layers provides evidence of their widespread presence during this time. Bryozoan colonies expanded across available surfaces, forming layered and branching structures that contributed to habitat formation. These colonies supported additional forms of life by providing attachment surfaces and modifying local water flow patterns. Their skeletal remains became part of sediment deposits after their life cycles ended. Mollusks continued their expansion into different marine regions. Gastropods and bivalves occupied a range of ecological roles, interacting with sediment surfaces, water columns, and organic material. Their activity contributed to nutrient cycling and sediment formation. Their shells accumulated in layers that became part of geological records. Echinoderms maintained their presence across seafloor environments, interacting with sediment and water systems. Their feeding behavior contributed to the movement of organic particles within marine environments. Their body structures allowed them to occupy different positions within seafloor communities. Microbial systems continued to function as foundational components of marine ecosystems. Their role in processing organic material supported the availability of nutrients for larger organisms. These systems operated continuously within sediment layers and water columns, maintaining chemical processes necessary for life activity. Sediment accumulation continued across marine environments, incorporating biological remains and mineral deposits. These layers formed over long intervals and preserved evidence of marine life activity. Water movement through these sediments influenced chemical conditions and supported ongoing biological processes. Marine ecosystems gradually developed into structured environments with multiple interacting components. Organisms occupied specific ecological roles based on their feeding methods, movement patterns, and attachment strategies. These roles included filtering particles from water, grazing on surfaces, moving through sediments, and processing organic material. Reef-like structures expanded in certain regions, forming physical frameworks that supported additional biological activity. These structures influenced the distribution of water flow and sediment deposition. Organisms attached to these structures and contributed to their continued growth through repeated biological activity. Trilobites, brachiopods, bryozoans, mollusks, echinoderms, and microbial communities continued to interact within these developing ecosystems. Their combined activity shaped the structure of marine environments and influenced the distribution of nutrients and sediment materials. Shell accumulation continued across seafloor regions, forming dense layers of biological material. These layers preserved evidence of life activity and contributed to the formation of sedimentary structures. Water movement through these layers allowed continued exchange of chemical elements necessary for biological processes. Marine habitats expanded into additional regions of shallow seas, where organisms established new communities. These communities formed through repeated colonization of available surfaces and interaction with surrounding environmental conditions. The presence of multiple organism groups within these habitats created continuous cycles of biological activity. Feeding systems among marine organisms involved filtration of water, grazing on surfaces, and processing of organic matter within sediments. These systems supported energy flow within ecosystems and allowed organisms to maintain their life processes across extended time periods. Echinoderm activity contributed to sediment reworking, influencing the distribution of organic particles within marine environments. Their movement across seafloors created pathways for nutrient redistribution. Bryozoan colonies continued to expand, forming complex surface structures that interacted with water flow. These colonies supported additional biological activity and contributed to habitat formation across marine regions. Mollusk populations maintained their presence across different ecological zones, interacting with sediments and water columns. Their activity supported nutrient cycling and sediment formation. Brachiopod shells continued to accumulate in sediment layers, forming part of the geological record of marine life activity. Their attachment to surfaces allowed them to remain stable within changing environmental conditions. Trilobites occupied various ecological roles within marine systems, moving across sediments and interacting with organic material. Their distribution across marine environments reflects their continued presence during this recovery interval. Microbial systems remained active within all marine environments, supporting chemical cycles and processing organic material. Their activity influenced sediment composition and nutrient availability across ecosystems. Sediment layers continued to build over time, incorporating biological remains and mineral deposits. These layers preserved evidence of marine life activity and provided surfaces for continued ecological development. Water movement through marine environments influenced the distribution of organisms and nutrients. This movement supported the expansion of marine communities into new regions of shallow seas. Reef-like structures continued to develop through repeated biological deposition, forming stable frameworks for additional organisms. These structures influenced ecological patterns across marine environments. Marine ecosystems maintained continuous cycles of biological activity involving feeding, growth, reproduction, and sediment interaction. These cycles operated across long intervals of geological time, supporting the ongoing development of life systems within oceanic environments, and the arrangement of organisms across seafloor regions continued shifting through gradual ecological processes that involved ongoing interaction between living organisms, sediments, and water conditions. The climate of the Silurian world developed after a major shift in Earth's environmental conditions that followed the end of the Ordovician period. During this time, Earth experienced a broad change in temperature patterns, ocean behavior, atmospheric composition, and the distribution of heat across the planet. These conditions formed a global climate system that remained active for millions of years, covering a time range that extended from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. At the beginning of this interval, the planet moved out of a phase marked by widespread glaciation. Ice sheets that had formed in earlier times reduced in size, and large areas of the planet experienced rising temperatures in both ocean and land environments. The reduction of large ice masses allowed ocean waters to spread across continental surfaces, increasing the area of shallow marine environments. These shallow seas held a large amount of heat energy and influenced the temperature of surrounding regions. Water circulation patterns adjusted in response to these expanding seas, and heat distribution across the planet became more even in many regions. Atmospheric composition during this time included elevated levels of carbon dioxide. This gas played a central role in shaping global temperature patterns. The presence of carbon dioxide in large quantities allowed more solar energy to remain within the atmosphere and oceans. This supported warmer conditions in many regions of the planet's surface. Oxygen was also present in the atmosphere at levels that supported early terrestrial life and marine ecosystems. The balance between these gases influenced weather patterns, evaporation rates, and the movement of moisture through the atmosphere. Ocean temperatures during the Silurian period remained elevated across broad regions of the planet. Warm water layers extended across shallow continental seas, supporting chemical reactions that influenced sediment formation and marine life activity. These waters carried dissolved minerals that accumulated in different layers of the ocean floor. Salinity levels varied in restricted basins where water circulation was limited. In such environments, evaporation processes led to the concentration of salts, forming deposits that later became part of the geological record. Rainfall patterns during this period were distributed across different climatic zones. Moisture from ocean surfaces entered the atmosphere through evaporation and returned to the surface as precipitation. Some regions experienced frequent rainfall events that maintained humid surface conditions. Other regions received less frequent precipitation, resulting in drier surface environments. These differences in rainfall distribution contributed to variations in soil formation and surface weathering processes. Temperature stability across long time spans was influenced by the interaction between oceans and atmosphere. Heat stored in ocean water moved gradually through circulation systems, reducing abrupt shifts in surface temperature. Ocean currents transported warm water across different latitudes, affecting atmospheric pressure systems. These pressure systems guided wind movement across the planet, shaping storm activity and cloud formation patterns. Storm systems during the Silurian period developed over ocean surfaces, where warm water and atmospheric moisture interacted. These systems formed areas of strong wind movement and heavy rainfall. Storm activity influenced sediment distribution along coastal regions and shallow marine environments. Waves generated by storm systems contributed to the reshaping of shorelines and the redistribution of marine sediments. The configuration of continents during this time influenced climate behavior across the planet. Large land areas were positioned in different hemispheres, affecting how solar energy was absorbed and distributed. Continental surfaces experienced heating during periods of direct sunlight exposure, and cooling occurred during periods of reduced solar input. These temperature changes influenced air movement patterns above land areas and contributed to the formation of wind systems that moved toward ocean regions. Surface conditions on land included early stages of soil development. Rock surfaces underwent gradual breakdown through chemical interaction with water and atmospheric gases. This process produced fine particles that contributed to early soil layers. Moisture levels in these developing soils varied depending on local rainfall and drainage conditions. In regions where moisture remained present for extended periods, chemical activity in soil layers increased, supporting the early expansion of plant life. The emergence of early terrestrial plants during this time influenced atmospheric moisture cycles. Plant surfaces contributed to the release of water vapor into the atmosphere through biological processes. This added moisture supported the formation of clouds and precipitation events. Plant activity also influenced the movement of gases between the surface and atmosphere, contributing to changes in local humidity levels. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were influenced by interactions between volcanic activity, ocean chemistry, and biological processes. Volcanic emissions release gases into the atmosphere, contributing to the overall concentration of carbon dioxide. Ocean waters absorbed and released carbon dioxide depending on temperature and chemical conditions. Biological activity in marine environments also affected carbon cycling through the production and breakdown of organic material. Sea level conditions remained elevated across much of the Silurian period. The reduction of large ice masses allowed ocean waters to occupy extensive areas of continental surfaces. These shallow marine environments became widespread across different regions of the planet. The presence of shallow seas influenced the distribution of heat and moisture, contributing to the overall stability of climate conditions in many areas. The interaction between sunlight and atmospheric gases shaped energy distribution across the planet. Solar radiation entered the atmosphere and was absorbed by land and ocean surfaces. Some of this energy was reflected back into the atmosphere, while another portion was retained within surface systems. The balance between absorption and reflection influenced temperature levels across different regions. Wind systems developed through differences in atmospheric pressure. Warm air rising from heated surfaces created areas of lower pressure, while cooler air created areas of higher pressure. Air movement between these regions formed wind patterns that transported moisture and heat across the planet. These wind systems influenced weather conditions and contributed to the distribution of precipitation. Cloud formation during the Silurian period occurred when moisture in the atmosphere condensed into small water droplets. This process took place in regions where temperature and pressure conditions allowed vapor to transform into liquid droplets. Cloud layers affected the amount of solar energy reaching the surface by partially blocking sunlight. This interaction influenced surface temperature levels and contributed to daily and seasonal variations in weather conditions. Seasonal cycles existed during this period due to the tilt of Earth's rotational axis. These cycles influenced the intensity of sunlight received in different regions throughout the year. Seasonal variation affected temperature levels, rainfall distribution, and atmospheric circulation patterns. In some regions, seasonal changes led to alternating wet and dry conditions that influenced surface processes and biological activity. Chemical processes in ocean water during this period played an important role in climate regulation. Dissolved gases interacted with minerals in seawater, forming compounds that accumulated on the ocean floor. These processes influenced the chemical balance of seawater and contributed to long-term carbon storage in sediment layers. The interaction between chemical processes and biological activity also affected oxygen distribution in marine environments. Marine environments during the Silurian period supported extensive reef systems formed by organisms that contributed to the buildup of calcium-based structures. These reef systems developed in shallow, warm waters where sunlight reached the ocean floor. The presence of these structures influenced water movement patterns and created areas where currents slowed, allowing sediment accumulation. Evaporation processes in warm regions contributed to the formation of concentrated mineral deposits in restricted basins. Water loss through evaporation increased the concentration of dissolved salts, leading to the precipitation of mineral layers. These processes occurred repeatedly over extended periods, contributing to the geological record of evaporate formations. Atmospheric circulation patterns during this time involved the movement of air masses across different regions of the planet. Warm air rose from heated surface areas and moved toward higher altitudes. Cooler air moved downward to replace rising warm air, creating continuous circulation. These patterns influenced the distribution of heat and moisture across the planet. The interaction between land surfaces and atmospheric systems contributed to regional climate differences. Land surfaces absorbed solar energy at varying rates, depending on surface composition and moisture content. These differences influenced local temperature levels and the formation of pressure systems. Air movement between land and ocean regions created additional circulation patterns that affected weather conditions. Dust and fine particles in the atmosphere influenced cloud formation processes. These particles provided surfaces for water vapor to condense, supporting the development of cloud structures. The presence of atmospheric particles also affected the distribution of solar energy, reaching the surface by scattering light in different directions. Volcanic activity during the Silurian period released gases and particles into the atmosphere. These emissions contributed to atmospheric composition and influenced short-term climate conditions. Volcanic gases interacted with atmospheric moisture and contributed to cloud formation processes. Over time, these contributions became part of broader climate cycles. The hydrological cycle during this period involved continuous movement of water between oceans, atmosphere, and land surfaces. Water evaporated from ocean surfaces, entered the atmosphere, condensed into clouds, and returned to the surface as precipitation. This cycle influenced moisture availability across different regions and supported surface weathering processes. River systems transported water from land areas into ocean basins. These systems carried dissolved minerals and sediments that accumulated in coastal regions. River activity influenced the distribution of nutrients in marine environments and contributed to sedimentary layering processes. The interaction between climate systems and geological activity shaped surface conditions across the planet. Tectonic movements influenced the formation of basins and elevated regions, affecting regional climate patterns. Changes in surface elevation influenced temperature and precipitation distribution by altering atmospheric circulation paths. Marine oxygen levels were influenced by temperature and circulation patterns in ocean waters. Warmer waters held different amounts of dissolved oxygen, depending on circulation strength and biological activity. Oxygen distribution influenced marine ecosystems and chemical processes in ocean environments. Long-term climate stability during this period was influenced by feedback mechanisms between atmosphere, ocean, and land systems. Changes in one part of the system affected other parts through interconnected processes involving heat, moisture, and gas exchange. These interactions maintained overall climate patterns across extended periods. Surface radiation balance involved the exchange of energy between incoming solar radiation and outgoing thermal energy from Earth's surface. This balance influenced temperature levels across different regions. Variations in surface composition, cloud cover, and atmospheric gases affected this energy exchange process. Chemical weathering processes on land contributed to the removal of atmospheric carbon dioxide through reactions between gases and rock surfaces. These reactions influenced atmospheric composition over long time periods and affected temperature regulation processes. The distribution of shallow marine environments across continental regions influenced heat storage in ocean systems. These environments absorbed solar energy and released it gradually, affecting surrounding atmospheric conditions. Water movement within these shallow seas contributed to the transfer of heat between regions. Moisture transport within the atmosphere involved the movement of water vapor, from warm regions to cooler regions. This process influenced precipitation patterns and supported the formation of clouds in different areas. Atmospheric moisture levels played a central role in regulating surface conditions. The interaction between biological activity and atmospheric composition continued throughout the Silurian period. Early land plants expanded across suitable regions, influencing local moisture levels and gas exchange processes. These biological systems interacted with climate systems through continuous exchange of gases and water vapor. Sediment formation in marine environments was influenced by climate conditions that affected water movement, chemical composition, and biological activity. Layers of sediment accumulated over long periods, recording changes in environmental conditions. Surface temperatures across the planet remained influenced by the balance of solar energy absorption, atmospheric composition, and ocean circulation. These factors interacted continuously, shaping climate behavior across the Silurian world without a final closing stage in the ongoing processes of the period. Life in Silurian oceans was filled with a wide range of living things that spread across shallow seas and deeper waters. These oceans existed during a long stretch of Earth's past that took place from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. During this long time, the seas covered large areas of the planet's surface, and water environments became home to many groups of animals and early marine ecosystems that were developing step by step after earlier major changes in life on Earth. The Silurian oceans held a growing variety of organisms that adapted to different depths, temperatures, and seafloor conditions, and these living things slowly formed more complex communities over time. The marine environment during this period had many shallow continental seas that spread over low land areas. These shallow waters were often warm and well lit by sunlight. Sunlight reached deep enough in many places to support the growth of simple marine plants and algae. These organisms formed the base of ocean life because they created food through natural processes using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Floating algae drifted near the surface, while other types of algae attached themselves to rocks and seafloors. These small forms of life supported many feeding relationships that developed in the ocean. Small animals were abundant in these seas. Some of the most important were early arthropods. These were animals with external skeletons and jointed bodies. Many arthropods in Silurian oceans lived on or near the seafloor. They moved slowly across sediments, feeding on organic particles. Others swam through the water. Trilobites were among the most widespread arthropods. They had segmented bodies and hard outer coverings. Different types of trilobites occupied different ocean environments, with some preferring shallow waters and others living in deeper regions. They fed on small particles, dead organic matter, or sometimes other small organisms. Brachiopods were also very common in Silurian seas. These animals had two shells that protected their soft bodies. They attached themselves to the seafloor using a small stalk or rested directly on sediments. Many brachiopods filtered tiny particles from water. Water flowed through their shells, and food particles were trapped and consumed. Large groups of brachiopods formed dense communities on the seafloor in many shallow marine areas. Their shells often accumulated after death, forming layers of biological remains across wide areas of ancient seabeds. Corals became more important in Silurian oceans. They built early reef structures that slowly developed in warm, shallow seas. These corals were simple animals that lived in colonies. Each small individual within a coral colony contributed to the growth of a larger, shared structure. Over time, many coral colonies joined together and created reef systems that provided shelter for many other marine organisms. These reef systems were not only built by corals alone, but also included other organisms that contributed to the structure of reefs. These reef environments became important locations for marine life because they provided protection and food sources for many species. Sponges were also present in Silurian oceans. These organisms had simple body structures and lived attached to the seafloor or rocky surfaces. Water passed through their bodies, allowing them to filter small food particles. Some sponges had soft bodies, while others had harder skeletal elements made of mineral materials. They played an important role in filtering water and recycling organic matter in marine environments. Mollusks were another group of animals living in Silurian seas. This group included early forms of snails, clams, and relatives of cephalopods. Some mollusks crawled on the seafloor using muscular foot structures. Others buried themselves in sediment. Cephalopod relatives had elongated shells and lived as active predators in the water. They used tentacle-like structures to capture prey. These animals moved more actively than many other marine organisms of the time and played an important role in the food chain of Silurian oceans. Echinoderms also existed in these ancient seas. This group includes early relatives of modern starfish and sea urchins. Many echinoderms lived attached to the seafloor using stalks. Some had body structures that allowed them to filter food from water currents. Their bodies were often made of calcified plates that provided support. These animals contributed to the diversity of life on the ocean floor and participated in feeding relationships within marine environments. Graptolites were another important group during this time. These organisms often floated in the water or attached themselves to surfaces. They formed colonial structures that resembled branching or chain-like forms. Each individual organism within a colony was small, but together they created large floating or attached systems. Graptolites are important for understanding ancient ocean conditions because their remains are found in layers of rock that formed in different marine environments. Their distribution shows how ocean conditions changed over time. Fish began to become more important in Silurian oceans. Early jawless fish were present in many marine environments. These fish had simple body structures without jaws. They moved through water using fins and fed by filtering small particles or scavenging organic matter. Some early fish developed armored bodies made of bony plates that protected them from predators. These armored fish were among the earliest vertebrates to develop protective structures in ocean environments. During this period, jawed fish began to appear. These early jawed fish marked a significant development in marine life. The presence of jaws allowed these fish to grasp and process food more effectively. This change influenced feeding behavior and increased interaction between predators and prey in marine ecosystems. Jawed fish were able to feed on a wider range of organisms, including other fish and small marine animals. Their development changed how energy moved through ocean food systems. Sea levels during the Silurian period were often high, which created extensive, shallow marine environments across many parts of the planet. These shallow seas provided stable conditions for marine life to spread and diversify. Warm temperatures in many regions supported biological activity, allowing organisms to grow and reproduce in large numbers. Sediments on the seafloor were often rich in organic material, which supported bottom-dwelling organisms that fed on decaying matter. Reef systems expanded significantly in Silurian oceans. These reef structures were built by communities of organisms working together through growth and accumulation of skeletal materials. Coral organisms were central to this process, but other marine organisms also contributed. Reefs provided shelter for many animals, including small fish, arthropods, and mollusks. Within reef environments, different organisms occupied specific spaces based on their feeding habits and movement patterns. Some lived within crevices while others moved across reef surfaces or floated nearby. Water currents in Silurian oceans played an important role in distributing nutrients and organisms. Currents carried planktonic organisms across long distances. These drifting organisms formed a major food source for many animals. The movement of water also helped spread larvae and reproductive stages of many marine species, allowing them to colonize new areas of ocean floor. This movement contributed to the expansion of marine life across different regions of the planet. In deeper parts of the ocean, life was less dense but still present. Organisms in these environments adapted to lower light conditions and different food sources. Many relied on organic material that sank from surface waters. Some animals lived in soft sediments and fed on particles buried within the seafloor. Deep ocean environments supported slower biological processes, and organisms in these regions often had adaptations that allowed them to survive with limited food availability. The chemical conditions of Silurian oceans influenced marine life. Oxygen levels in water affected the distribution of organisms. Areas with higher oxygen supported more active life forms, while lower oxygen regions supported fewer species. Carbonate-rich waters contributed to the formation of shells and skeletal structures in many marine organisms. These mineral-rich conditions allowed organisms to build protective coverings that supported survival in various environments. Silurian oceans also experienced changes over time due to shifts in Earth's systems. Sea levels changed gradually, causing expansion and reduction of shallow marine habitats. These changes influenced where organisms could live and how they spread across ocean regions. Some species adapted to changing environments by shifting their habitats, while others remained in stable regions where conditions stayed consistent. Marine food systems in Silurian oceans were based on energy flow from sunlight to small organisms and then to larger animals. Primary producers such as algae formed the base of these systems. Small organisms fed on these producers, and larger animals fed on smaller ones. This structure supported a wide range of life forms, each occupying different roles in the ocean environment. Feeding relationships were not fixed in one form, as many organisms could consume different types of food depending on availability. Silurian oceans also contained microbial life that played an important role in recycling nutrients. Bacteria and other microorganisms broke down dead organic material. This process returned nutrients to the water and sediments, making them available for other organisms. Microbial activity helped maintain the balance of marine ecosystems and supported continuous cycles of life and decay. Sediments on the ocean floor preserved many remains of Silurian marine life. Shells, skeletal fragments, and other hard parts accumulated over time and formed layers. These layers provide evidence of the diversity and distribution of marine organisms during this period. The composition of sediments also shows variations in environmental conditions, such as water depth, oxygen levels, and biological activity. Silurian oceans supported early stages of complex marine ecosystems. Different groups of organisms interacted through feeding, movement, and reproduction. These interactions formed structured communities that spread across large areas of shallow seas. Coral reef systems, brachiopod beds, trilobite populations, mollusk communities, and early fish habitats all existed within these marine environments. Each group contributed to the overall structure of ocean life. The development of early fish in Silurian oceans introduced new types of movement and feeding behavior. Fish could move more freely through water compared to many bottom-dwelling organisms. This mobility allowed them to access different food sources and avoid certain environmental pressures. Their presence added new layers of interaction within marine ecosystems. Floating organisms in Silurian oceans included planktonic species that drifted with currents. These organisms formed an important part of the ocean's biological structure. They provided food for many small animals and supported energy flow through marine systems. Planktonic life forms were diverse and included both plant-like and animal-like organisms. Seafloor environments varied widely in Silurian oceans. Some areas had soft mud or sand, while others had rocky surfaces or reef structures. Each type of surface supported different communities of organisms. Soft sediments supported burrowing animals and deposit feeders. Rocky areas supported attached organisms such as sponges and corals. Reef structures provided complex habitats with many small spaces for shelter. Marine life during the Silurian period continued to develop in complexity through interactions among organisms and changing environmental conditions. The expansion of reef systems, the growth of early fish populations, and the presence of diverse invertebrate groups created a wide range of ecological roles across ocean environments. These roles included feeding, filtering, scavenging, predation, and reproduction, all of which shaped the structure of marine ecosystems throughout Silurian oceans. Continental movement during the Silurian period refers to the slow shifting and repositioning of Earth's landmasses across the surface of the planet during a span of time that extended from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. During this time, Earth's crust was made of large and smaller plates that moved over the softer layer beneath them. These movements changed the arrangement of continents, changed ocean spaces, and influenced the shape of shallow seas that covered large regions of the planet. At the beginning of the Silurian period, the major land areas were grouped into several large continental masses. One of these was Gondwana, which included land that would later become parts of Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and India. Gondwana extended across a wide range of southern latitudes. Another major landmass was Laurentia, which contained much of what is now North America and Greenland. Baltica was another major landmass, which included parts of what is now Northern Europe. Siberia existed as another separate continental block, located at a distance from Laurentia and Baltica. The arrangement of these landmasses was influenced by earlier movements that occurred during the Ordovician period, and these movements continued into the Silurian period without interruption. The crustal plates carrying these continents moved slowly across the planet's surface over long periods of time. These movements were not uniform across all regions, and different sections of the crust experienced different directions of motion. Some areas moved toward each other, while other areas moved away from each other, creating spaces that filled with ocean water or shallow seas. One of the most important features of continental movement during the Silurian period was the gradual reduction in the width of the Iapetus Ocean. This ocean separated Laurentia from Baltica and parts of Gondwana during earlier times. As the plates moved, the ocean floor beneath the Iapetus Ocean was slowly pushed downward into the mantle through subduction processes. This caused the ocean space to become narrower over time. As the ocean floor moved downward, volcanic activity occurred along the edges of the surrounding continental regions. This volcanic activity was linked to the friction and pressure created by the movement of tectonic plates. The movement of Laurentia toward Baltica and parts of Gondwana caused changes along the edges of these continents. Sediments that had accumulated on the ocean floor were pushed upward and folded into large formations. These formations became part of mountain-building activity that extended across long zones where plates met. This activity created rising land areas that were shaped by the continuous pressure from plate motion. The process of uplift affected large sections of land that were previously under shallow sea conditions. Baltica also moved during this time and changed its position relative to other landmasses. Its movement brought it closer to Laurentia, and this contributed to the reduction of ocean space between them. The movement of Baltica involved slow shifts of the crust that carried it across oceanic regions. As Baltica moved, sediments along its edges were compressed and altered. These sediments formed layers that were gradually transformed into rock structures through pressure and heat within the crust. Gondwana remained a large and stable landmass during the Silurian period, but it also experienced internal movement within its own structure. Different parts of Gondwana shifted slightly relative to each other due to internal stress within the tectonic plates. The northern edge of Gondwana was especially active in terms of interaction with surrounding oceanic regions. This edge was affected by subduction zones where oceanic crust moved downward into the mantle beneath continental crust. These zones created volcanic arcs and regions of crustal deformation. Siberia remained separate from the other major continents during much of the Silurian period. It moved through oceanic areas and gradually changed its position relative to Baltica and Laurentia. The movement of Siberia was influenced by the forces acting on the tectonic plate beneath it. As it moved, the surrounding ocean floor adjusted through spreading and subduction processes in different regions of the global ocean system. Ocean basins during the Silurian period were not fixed in shape or size. The movement of tectonic plates caused continuous change in the distribution of ocean floor. New ocean crust was created in some areas where plates moved apart, while older ocean crust was pushed downward in other areas where plates came together. These processes affected the arrangement of continents and ocean basins throughout the period. Shallow seas covered large areas of continental surfaces during the Silurian period. These seas formed where land was positioned at low elevation levels relative to sea level conditions. The movement of tectonic plates influenced the depth and extent of these shallow seas. When land areas slowly moved downward due to crustal adjustments, seawater spread over those regions. When land areas moved upward due to tectonic forces, seawater retreated from those regions. This created changing patterns of marine coverage over continental surfaces. The edges of continents were especially affected by tectonic movement. These edges experienced folding, faulting, and uplift due to pressure from colliding or interacting plates. Sediments that had been deposited in earlier marine environments were compressed and transformed into rock layers. These rock layers recorded the movement of continents over time through their structure and composition. Volcanic activity occurred in several regions during the Silurian period as a direct result of plate movement. When oceanic crust moved downward beneath continental crust, melting occurred in the mantle. This melting produced magma that rose through the crust and reached the surface in volcanic eruptions. These eruptions formed volcanic islands and contributed to the growth of continental margins. Volcanic material also added new rock to the crust, changing the composition of surface areas over time. Fault systems developed in regions where tectonic stress was concentrated. These faults allowed sections of the crust to move relative to each other. Movement along faults created fractures in rock layers and influenced the shape of land surfaces. Some faults were associated with vertical movement of crustal blocks, while others involved horizontal displacement of rock formations. These fault systems extended across large areas and remained active throughout the Silurian period. Sediment transport was strongly influenced by continental movement. Rivers carried material from inland regions toward coastal areas where shallow seas were present. These sediments were deposited in layers along continental margins. Over time, continued tectonic movement altered the position of these sediment layers. Some were lifted above sea level conditions, while others were buried beneath new layers of sediment or volcanic material. The movement of continents also affected ocean currents and water circulation patterns. As land masses changed position, the shape of ocean basins changed. These changes influenced how water moved across the planet's surface. Ocean currents flowed through openings between continents and around continental edges. These currents transported nutrients and sediments across large distances within marine environments. During the Silurian period, the closure of ocean spaces in certain regions led to the formation of new land connections. As tectonic plates moved closer together, ocean basins became narrower. Eventually, in some areas, land masses came into direct contact. This contact resulted in crustal deformation and the formation of mountain belts. These mountain belts extended across regions where previous ocean floors had existed. The Caledonian region experienced significant tectonic activity during this time. This activity was associated with the movement of Laurentia, Baltica, and smaller land fragments. The interaction between these land masses caused the deformation of crustal materials and the formation of elevated land regions. Rocks in these areas show evidence of folding and pressure changes that occurred during continental movement. The movement of tectonic plates also influenced climate patterns indirectly, through changes in land and sea distribution. Large shallow seas that covered continental regions were affected by shifts in land elevation and plate motion. These seas changed in extent as continents moved and adjusted. The presence of extensive shallow seas influenced evaporation and precipitation patterns across different regions of the planet. The interaction between oceanic and continental crust during the Silurian period involved continuous recycling of material. Oceanic crust moved downward into the mantle at subduction zones, where it was gradually melted and incorporated into deeper Earth processes. Continental crust remained more stable but was reshaped through folding, faulting, and uplift. This interaction created a dynamic system where surface features were continuously modified. The northern regions of Gondwana experienced tectonic interactions that contributed to changes in land configuration. These interactions included subduction along ocean margins and the formation of volcanic arcs. These arcs developed where magma reached the surface through crustal openings. The accumulation of volcanic material contributed to the growth of land areas along continental edges. Laurentia experienced internal deformation in several regions due to tectonic pressure. Sedimentary layers that had formed in earlier periods were affected by folding and uplift. These processes created regions of elevated terrain that were associated with plate interaction zones. The edges of Laurentia were particularly influenced by movement towards other land masses. Baltica's movement toward Laurentia contributed to significant geological changes along their margins. As the distance between these land masses reduced, oceanic crust between them was consumed at subduction zones. This process involved downward movement of ocean floor materials into the mantle. The resulting geological activity affected surrounding regions through volcanic and seismic processes. Siberia's isolated position during much of the Silurian period meant that it experienced different tectonic conditions compared to Laurentia and Baltica. Its movement occurred across oceanic regions where crustal activity was present but not directly linked to major continental collisions during most of the period. The surrounding oceanic crust continued to form and be recycled through mantle processes. The structure of Earth's lithosphere during the Silurian period was divided into multiple moving plates that interacted continuously. These plates included both continental and oceanic crust. The boundaries between these plates were zones of active geological processes, including subduction, spreading, and faulting. These boundaries shaped the movement of continents and the formation of ocean basins. Mid-ocean ridge systems existed where new ocean crust was formed. At these locations, magma rose from beneath the Earth's surface and cooled to form new rock. This process pushed existing ocean crust outward and contributed to the movement of tectonic plates. As new crust formed, older crust was transported toward subduction zones where it was recycled into the mantle. The movement of continents also influenced the distribution of shallow marine environments. As continents shifted position, large areas of continental shelf were submerged or exposed. These shallow marine environments were important zones for sediment deposition. Layers of sediment accumulated over time, recording the changes in sea level and tectonic activity. Crustal deformation during the Silurian period included folding of rock layers, formation of faults, and uplift of land regions. These processes occurred in zones where tectonic plates interacted. The pressure generated by these interactions caused changes in rock structure at both surface and deeper crustal levels. These changes extended across long regions of the Earth's crust. The movement of tectonic plates during the Silurian period continued without interruption across millions of years. This continuous movement maintained a dynamic surface environment where continents shifted position, ocean basins changed shape, and geological structures were modified through ongoing processes. The arrangement of land and sea remained in a state of gradual transformation, driven by crustal motion, mantle dynamics, and surface interactions that extended across all major continental regions including Gondwana, Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia, with oceanic systems adjusting continuously through spreading centers and subduction zones, while sediment layers accumulated and were altered through burial, uplift, and deformation across extensive regions of the planet's surface. The transition from the Silurian period into the Devonian period represents a long stretch of Earth's deep history, in which living things, oceans, land surfaces, and atmospheric conditions went through steady and continuous change over many millions of years. The Silurian period lasted from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. After this long span of time, Earth moved into the Devonian period, which began about 419 million years ago and continued until about 359 million years ago. The passage from one period into the other did not happen in a sudden moment. It took place through gradual shifts in sea levels, living communities, climate patterns, ocean chemistry, and land-based ecosystems. These changes shaped the direction of life on Earth in ways that influenced marine organisms, early plants, and the first groups of animals beginning to explore land environments in more active ways. During the late Silurian time, Earth had large shallow seas covering wide areas of the continents. These seas supported many living organisms, including coral-like reef builders, brachiopods, mollusks, early arthropods, and early forms of fish. The marine ecosystems were well developed in many regions, and life in the oceans was widespread. Toward the end of the Silurian period, changes in sea level began to occur. These changes were not instant, but took place over long stretches of time, measured in millions of years. Some areas experienced gradual lowering of sea levels, exposing more land surfaces. Other areas maintained shallow marine conditions for longer periods. This shifting balance between land and sea affected the distribution of marine habitats and the locations where organisms could live and grow. Ocean chemistry also changed during this transition. The amount of oxygen in seawater increased in some regions, allowing certain organisms to expand into new environments. At the same time, variations in carbon levels influenced the growth of reef-building organisms. Reef systems that had been stable in earlier Silurian times began to experience changes in structure and distribution. Coral-like organisms and stromatoporoids, which contributed to reef formation, continued to exist, but their communities adjusted to new environmental conditions. Some reef areas became less stable, while other regions became new centers for reef development in early Devonian time. The climate during the late Silurian and early Devonian remained generally warm across many parts of the planet. Ice sheets were not widespread at this time, and large areas of shallow seas helped regulate global temperatures. Rainfall patterns varied across different regions, influenced by the positions of continents and ocean currents. In some continental areas, conditions became more suitable for plant growth on land. Early plants that had already appeared in Silurian time continued to develop structural features that helped them survive in environments away from water. These plants included early vascular forms that had systems for transporting water and nutrients through their bodies. As the transition into the Devonian period took place, these plants expanded into more regions of land, especially in areas close to water sources. The movement of continents played an important role in shaping environmental conditions during this time. Land masses were arranged differently from modern geography. Large continental blocks were positioned near the equator and in southern hemisphere regions. Tectonic activity caused slow shifts in the arrangement of these landmasses. Mountain building processes occurred in some areas due to collisions and interactions between crustal plates. These geological processes influenced erosion patterns, river formation, and sediment movement into shallow seas. Sediments carried into marine environments affected the composition of seabeds and contributed to changes in habitats for marine organisms. At the end of the Silurian period, several groups of marine organisms experienced changes in population size and distribution. Some reef communities declined in certain regions due to environmental stress, including changes in water depth and sediment levels. Other organisms adapted and continued into the Devonian period with new patterns of growth and distribution. Brachiopods remained common in many marine environments, occupying different ecological roles on the seafloor. Mollusks, including early forms of cephalopods, continued to develop more diverse structures and behaviors. Arthropods, including early sea scorpions, remained active predators in marine ecosystems, occupying various ecological niches. Fish groups experienced important developments during this transitional time. Jawless fish, which had been present earlier in the Silurian period, continued to exist in many marine environments. At the same time, jawed fish began to become more widespread. These jawed forms included early representatives of groups that would later give rise to cartilaginous fish and bony fish. The development of jaws allowed these fish to interact with food sources in new ways, influencing feeding patterns in marine ecosystems. As the Devonian period began, fish diversity increased and new forms appeared in both shallow marine waters and deeper ocean regions. On land, the transition into the Devonian period marked a gradual increase in plant coverage in some regions. Early plants that had begun to appear in the Silurian period continued to expand. These plants did not have complex leaves or deep root systems at first, but they developed structures that allowed them to grow in moist environments near water. Some early plants had simple branching stems and small surface areas for photosynthesis. Over time, during the early Devonian, more plant groups developed vascular tissues that allowed water to move through their structures more efficiently. This development supported larger growth forms and allowed plants to spread into areas farther from constant water sources. Soil formation processes also became more active during this transition. As plants grew on land, they contributed organic material to the surface of the earth. This material mixed with weathered rock particles, forming early soils that supported additional plant growth. The interaction between plants, soil, and water systems created conditions that allowed land ecosystems to become more stable in some regions. River systems carried sediments from inland areas to coastal zones, influencing both land and marine environments. Atmospheric conditions during this time also played a role in shaping life on Earth. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere continued to rise gradually due to photosynthetic activity from marine organisms and expanding land plants. Carbon dioxide levels experienced changes influenced by geological processes and biological activity. These atmospheric changes affected temperature regulation and contributed to variations in climate conditions across different regions of the planet. The balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide influenced the development of more complex life forms, especially in marine environments where oxygen availability affected the distribution of organisms. The boundary between the Silurian and Devonian periods is defined in geological time by the appearance and disappearance of certain fossil groups. Scientists use fossil records to identify this boundary in rock layers. The transition is marked by changes in the types of marine organisms preserved in sedimentary rocks. Some species that were common in late Silurian layers became less common or disappeared in early Devonian layers, while new species appeared and expanded in distribution. These fossil changes reflect environmental shifts that took place over long periods of time. In ocean environments, reef systems continued to adjust to changing conditions. Reef-building organisms such as stromatoporoids and corals formed structures in shallow marine areas, although their distribution varied across different regions. These reef systems provided habitats for many marine organisms, including small invertebrates and fish. The structure of reef environments influenced water movement, sediment deposition, and nutrient distribution in surrounding areas. As conditions changed, reef communities adapted by shifting their locations and adjusting their growth patterns. Marine plankton also played an important role during this transition. Microscopic organisms floating in ocean waters formed the base of many food chains. Changes in nutrient levels and water chemistry affected plankton populations, influencing the availability of food for larger organisms. These changes had effects throughout marine ecosystems, shaping the distribution and abundance of different species. In freshwater and nearshore environments, early fish and invertebrates interacted in complex ways. Some fish species began to explore shallow water habitats with greater frequency. These environments included river deltas, lagoons, and coastal wetlands. Such habitats provided access to new food sources and shelter. The presence of plants near shorelines also influenced these environments by stabilizing sediments and altering water flow patterns. During the early Devonian period, fish diversity continued to increase. Jaw-eyed fish became more widespread in both marine and freshwater environments. These fish developed different body shapes and feeding strategies, allowing them to occupy various ecological roles. Some forms were active swimmers in open waters, while others lived closer to the seabed. The expansion of fish diversity contributed to more complex interactions within aquatic ecosystems. Plant life on land continued to develop in structure and distribution. Early vascular plants became more common in suitable environments. These plants included forms that could grow upright and spread across moist soil surfaces. Some early plant groups developed simple branching patterns that allowed them to capture sunlight more effectively. Reproduction in these plants often involved spores, which could be carried by wind or water to new locations. This method of reproduction allowed plants to spread across large areas over long periods of time. As plants expanded across land surfaces, they influenced the physical environment. Their growth contributed to changes in erosion rates and sediment movement. Plant roots helped stabilize soil in some regions, reducing the movement of loose particles during rainfall. This stabilization supported the development of more complex land ecosystems, allowing additional plant and animal life to establish itself in those environments. In marine environments, the early Devonian period continued to support diverse ecosystems. Brachiopods, mollusks, arthropods, and echinoderms remained present in many regions. Coral-like organisms continued to form reef structures in shallow waters. These ecosystems were influenced by water temperature, nutrient availability, and sediment levels. Changes in any of these factors affected the distribution of marine life. Geological activity during this time also influenced environmental conditions. Plate movements caused gradual shifts in landmass positions. Mountain building processes in some regions contributed to the creation of new landscapes. Erosion of these upland areas supplied sediments to rivers and seas, affecting both terrestrial and marine environments. Volcanic activity in certain regions released gases into the atmosphere, influencing climate patterns over long periods. The interaction between land, sea, and atmosphere during the transition from the Silurian to the Devonian period created conditions that supported ongoing biological development. Living organisms in both marine and terrestrial environments responded to changes in their surroundings through gradual adaptation over many generations. These adaptations included changes in body structure, feeding behavior, reproduction, and habitat use. Early vertebrates during this time continued to develop more complex features. The presence of jaws in fish allowed for more varied feeding methods. Some fish developed paired fins that improved movement and stability in water. These developments contributed to the expansion of fish populations into new ecological niches. Freshwater systems became important environments for diversification, providing isolated habitats where different forms could develop. Plant expansion on land continued to influence atmospheric and environmental conditions. Increased plant coverage contributed to changes in carbon cycling. Organic material from plants accumulated in soil and sediment layers, affecting long-term carbon storage. These processes influenced the composition of the atmosphere and the chemical balance of surface environments. Shallow marine environments remained dynamic during this transition. Sediment deposition from rivers influenced coastal areas, creating new habitats and altering existing ones. Marine organisms adapted to changes in water depth and sediment composition. Some species moved into new areas while others adjusted to local conditions over long periods. Throughout the transition, fossil evidence preserved in rock layers provides detailed information about changes in life forms and environments. These records show gradual shifts in species composition across the Silurian and Devonian boundary, the appearance of new fish groups, expansion of land plants, and continued presence of marine invertebrates all form part of this long sequence of change recorded in sedimentary layers. The early Devonian environment continued to support increasing complexity in both marine and terrestrial systems. Organisms interacted with their surroundings through feeding, growth, reproduction, and movement. Environmental conditions such as water temperature, oxygen levels, and nutrient availability influence these interactions across different regions of the planet. Early marine life recovery, in relation to the Silurian period, refers to the gradual rebuilding of ocean ecosystems after the major loss of life at the end of the Ordovician period, which happened about 444 million years ago. This recovery did not begin suddenly in a fully stable environment. Instead, it began in oceans that were still adjusting to major changes in temperature, sea level, oxygen levels, and ocean chemistry. The Silurian period, which lasted from about 444 million to 419 million years ago, represents one of the most important intervals in Earth's history when marine life slowly rebuilt itself and became more diverse and more complex again. At the very beginning of the Silurian period, marine environments were still strongly influenced by the conditions left behind by the Ordovician extinction event. Large areas of shallow seas had been reduced due to falling sea levels caused by global cooling and the expansion of ice sheets near the end of the Ordovician. When the Silurian period began, temperatures started to rise again and ice sheets gradually melted. This caused sea levels to rise slowly, flooding continental edges and creating new shallow marine habitats. These newly formed shallow seas became important spaces where marine life could return and expand. The first part of early marine recovery in the Silurian oceans involved the return and expansion of microorganisms. These included bacteria, algae, and other microscopic life forms that could survive in changing conditions. These organisms were among the earliest to re-establish stable biological activity in the oceans. They lived in both deep and shallow waters, and they helped restart nutrient cycling in marine ecosystems. As they grew and multiplied, they broke down organic material that remained from earlier periods and released nutrients back into the water. This process supported the return of more complex organisms. During the earliest Silurian stages, microbial communities formed widespread mats on the seafloor in many shallow marine regions. These microbial mats were layers of microorganisms that grew tightly packed together on sediment surfaces. They helped stabilize sediments that had been disturbed during the extinction interval. In areas where larger animals were still rare, these microbial communities became one of the main forms of visible life on the seafloor. They also influenced chemical conditions in the surrounding water by affecting oxygen and carbon levels, especially in shallow coastal zones. As Silurian marine environments became more stable, small and simple marine animals began to return in greater numbers. These animals included early forms of mollusks, worms, and simple filter-feeding organisms. They lived in shallow seas where food was more available and where oxygen levels were sufficient to support their survival. These organisms fed mainly on microorganisms and organic particles in the water. Their return marked a key step in rebuilding animal life in the Silurian oceans. Food systems in early Silurian marine environments were simple at first. Microorganisms formed the base of the system. Small animals fed directly on these microorganisms. slightly larger animals fed on the smaller animals. These early food relationships were not yet complex or fully stable across all marine regions. Some areas of the ocean had more active biological systems, while others were still recovering slowly. Over time, as more species returned, these food systems became more connected and more stable. One of the most important factors in Silurian marine recovery was the gradual increase in sea level during the early part of the period. As glaciers melted from the late Ordovician Ice Age, large areas of continental shelves became flooded again. These shallow marine environments provided warm, nutrient-rich waters that supported the spread of marine organisms. These environments became centers of biological activity, where new communities of marine life developed and expanded. Oxygen levels in Silurian oceans also played a major role in shaping recovery. In some shallow regions, oxygen levels were relatively high, allowing more active and diverse marine life to develop. In deeper or more isolated regions, oxygen levels could be lower, limiting the types of organisms that could survive there. This variation in oxygen distribution meant that marine recovery did not occur evenly across all ocean areas. Some regions became biologically active earlier, while others took longer to recover. Ocean currents during the Silurian period helped distribute nutrients and organisms across different marine environments. These currents transported microscopic life, larvae of early animals, and dissolved nutrients. This movement allowed life to spread gradually into new areas that had become suitable for colonization. As a result, marine organisms began to occupy a wider range of environments, although their distribution was still uneven in the early stages of recovery. Sediment layers from the early Silurian period show evidence of increasing biological activity over time. In the earliest layers, there is limited fossil content, mostly microbial traces and very simple organisms. As time progresses, more complex fossils begin to appear, including early mollusks and other small marine animals. Burrowing activity in sediments also becomes more common. These burrowing organisms mixed and oxygenated the sea floor, changing the structure of marine sediments and making them more suitable for additional life forms. Reef systems during the early Silurian recovery were still very limited. After the end of the Ordovician extinction, many reef-building organisms had declined significantly. In early Silurian oceans, reef structures were not yet fully developed. Instead, simple biological structures formed by microbial communities and small sessile organisms were more common. Over time, reef-building organisms slowly returned, especially groups of corals and other skeletal, forming animals. As they reappeared, they began to construct more stable reef environments that supported increasing biodiversity. Plankton recovery was also an essential part of Silurian marine life rebuilding. Plankton include microscopic organisms that float in the ocean and drift with currents. They form the foundation of many marine food systems. In the early Silurian period, plankton communities changed in composition as some groups declined and others expanded. Plant-like plankton helped produce oxygen through photosynthesis, while animal-like plankton fed on smaller organisms. Their recovery strengthened the base of marine food chains and supported the growth of larger organisms. Temperature changes in the Silurian oceans influenced how quickly marine life recovered. At the beginning of the period, Earth was moving out of a cooler climate phase, and temperatures were gradually rising. This warming allowed more shallow seas to form and remain stable for longer periods. Warmer conditions supported higher biological activity in many marine environments. However, changes in temperature were not uniform across the planet, so some regions experienced slower recovery depending on local conditions. The return of marine life during the Silurian period also involved changes in ecological structure. As more organisms appeared, relationships between species became more complex. Feeding interactions expanded beyond simple systems, and new ecological roles began to form. Organisms adapted to different habitats, such as shallow coastal waters, deeper ocean regions, and reef environments. This diversification gradually increased the complexity of marine ecosystems throughout the Silurian seas. Burrowing organisms became especially important in Silurian marine recovery. These animals moved through sediments on the seafloor, creating tunnels and mixing layers of sediment. This activity allowed oxygen to penetrate deeper into the seafloor, which supported more life within sediments. It also changed the physical structure of marine habitats, making them more suitable for a wider range of organisms. Over time, this process helped stabilize marine ecosystems and supported further biological expansion. The Silurian period represents a long phase where early marine life recovery continued to develop across millions of years. The oceans slowly shifted from simplified ecosystems dominated by microorganisms and small animals into more structured marine environments with diverse groups of organisms. This process did not happen evenly or quickly, but through continuous biological activity, environmental change, and gradual expansion of life into new habitats across the world's oceans. The changes in atmospheric oxygen levels during the Silurian period took place over a long span of Earth's history, covering a time from about 444 million years ago to about 419 million years ago. During this period, the air above the planet was shaped by slow natural processes that involved oceans, rocks, living organisms in the sea, and the early beginnings of life on land. The oxygen in the atmosphere did not remain fixed. It shifted through time as different natural systems interacted with each other in steady and continuous ways. At the start of the Silurian period, the atmosphere already contained oxygen that had been building up for a very long time. This oxygen came mainly from early marine organisms that lived in the oceans before the Silurian period began. These organisms carried out photosynthesis, a process in which sunlight was used to create energy, and oxygen was released into the surrounding water. Some of this oxygen moved from the oceans into the air. Over many millions of years, this slow movement allowed oxygen to become a stable part of the atmosphere. At the beginning stage of the Silurian period, atmospheric oxygen was present at a level that supported many forms of marine life and allowed chemical processes on Earth's surface to function in stable ways. The oceans played a very large role in controlling how much oxygen entered the air. Water bodies absorbed oxygen from organisms and also released oxygen into the atmosphere when conditions allowed exchange between ocean and air. This exchange depended on temperature, ocean circulation, and biological activity in surface waters. During the early part of the Silurian period, the oceans contained a wide range of living organisms such as algae and early plankton. These organisms lived near the surface where sunlight was available. They produced oxygen as part of their daily life processes. The oxygen produced in the upper ocean layers slowly spread through water movement and reached the atmosphere through continuous gas exchange. This steady flow of oxygen from ocean to air helped maintain the presence of oxygen in the atmosphere during this time. At the same time, volcanic activity on Earth contributed gases into the atmosphere. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide, water vapor, sulfur compounds, and other gases. These gases interacted with oxygen in various chemical reactions. some reactions consumed oxygen, while other natural processes balanced these changes over long periods. The Silurian atmosphere remained in a state where oxygen continued to be present due to the balance between oxygen production and oxygen consumption. As the Silurian period moved forward through time, life in the oceans became more complex. Coral-like organisms, shell-forming animals, and various types of marine arthropods became more common. Many of these organisms depended on oxygen dissolved in water. Their presence influenced oxygen levels in the oceans, which in turn influenced oxygen exchange with the atmosphere. As marine ecosystems became more active, oxygen cycling also became more active. A very important development during the Silurian period involved the gradual appearance of plant life on land. These early land plants were simple in structure. They lived in moist environments near shorelines, riverbanks, and damp soil surfaces. These plants carried out photosynthesis using sunlight, carbon dioxide from the air, and water from their surroundings. During this process, oxygen was released directly into the atmosphere. The introduction of land-based photosynthesis changed the pattern of oxygen production. Before this development, most oxygen came from marine life. After the appearance of early land plants, oxygen production began to take place both in oceans and on land. The land surface provided new areas where sunlight could be used for oxygen production without being limited by water depth or ocean conditions. These early plants spread slowly across suitable environments. As they expanded, more areas of land became active in oxygen production. The atmosphere received oxygen from a growing number of land-based sources. This process took place gradually over long periods of time during the later stages of the Silurian period. Another important factor affecting oxygen levels was the burial of organic material. When plants and marine organisms died, their remains sometimes sank into sediment at the bottom of oceans or were buried in soil on land. When organic material becomes buried and removed from direct contact with air or water, it no longer uses oxygen for decomposition in the same immediate way. This burial process allowed oxygen produced by living organisms to remain in the atmosphere for longer periods. Sedimentary rocks formed during this time captured organic material and locked it away. Over long periods, this contributed to the stabilization of atmospheric oxygen. The slow accumulation of sediments on ocean floors and coastal regions played a role in controlling how much oxygen was consumed through decay processes. In the middle stages of the Silurian period, atmospheric oxygen remained part of a balanced system involving production and consumption. Oxygen continued to be generated by marine photosynthetic organisms and early land plants. At the same time, oxygen was used in natural chemical reactions involving rocks, water, and living organisms. The balance between these processes allowed oxygen to remain present in the atmosphere at levels that supported ongoing biological development. The presence of oxygen in the atmosphere also affected the chemistry of surface rocks. Oxygen reacted with iron and other elements exposed at Earth's surface. These reactions formed new mineral types and changed the composition of soils and sediments. The weathering of rocks consumed some oxygen, but this process also contributed nutrients to oceans and land surfaces, supporting further biological activity. During the Silurian period, ocean circulation patterns influenced how oxygen was distributed in seawater. Warm and cold water movements helped transport oxygen from surface waters to deeper regions. This circulation supported marine life in different parts of the ocean. The oxygen in water also played a role in breaking down organic matter, which affected how carbon and nutrients moved through ecosystems. As land plants became more established in later Silurian times, the amount of oxygen released into the atmosphere through photosynthesis continued to grow steadily. These plants included simple forms with thin structures that allowed gas exchange directly through their surfaces. They did not yet have complex roots or leaves, but they were capable of carrying out efficient photosynthesis in moist environments. The expansion of plant-covered areas on land also affected soil formation. As plants grew and died, they added organic material to the ground. This material changed the structure of early soils and influenced how gases moved between the ground and the atmosphere. Oxygen played a role in these processes by supporting decomposition and chemical reactions in soil environments. Atmospheric oxygen during this time also interacted with ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Oxygen molecules in the upper atmosphere could form ozone through chemical reactions. Ozone formation created a layer that absorbed some ultraviolet radiation. This process influenced the environment near Earth's surface and affected how living organisms experienced sunlight exposure. Throughout the Silurian period, oxygen levels were shaped by a combination of biological activity, geological processes, and atmospheric chemistry. These factors work together in continuous cycles. Photosynthesis added oxygen to the atmosphere. Respiration and decay used oxygen. Burial of organic material reduced oxygen consumption over time. Rock weathering and volcanic gases also interacted with oxygen in various ways. The stability of oxygen in the atmosphere allowed marine ecosystems to continue developing. Complex communities of organisms formed in shallow seas, where oxygen-rich waters supported feeding, movement, and reproduction. These ecosystems contributed further to oxygen cycling through their daily biological activities. Near the later part of the Silurian period, early vascular plants began to appear. These plants had internal structures that allowed water and nutrients to move more efficiently within their bodies. This development supported more widespread growth on land surfaces. As these plants spread, they contributed additional oxygen to the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The gradual spread of vegetation across land also influenced humidity and water movement near the surface. Plant-covered areas helped slow water flow after rainfall and influenced how moisture was retained in soil. These conditions supported further plant growth and continued oxygen production. Oxygen in the atmosphere during this time was also involved in the breakdown of methane and other gases released from natural sources. These chemical processes influenced the overall composition of the atmosphere and affected how gases were balanced over long periods. The Silurian atmosphere was shaped by slow and continuous change rather than sudden shifts. Oxygen levels responded to the growth of life in both oceans and land environments. Each biological expansion contributed to oxygen production, while each chemical and geological process contributed to oxygen consumption or storage. Volcanic regions continued to release gases throughout the Silurian period. These emissions introduced new materials into the atmosphere that interacted with oxygen. Over long time spans, chemical reactions between volcanic gases and atmospheric oxygen influenced air composition and environmental conditions. The interaction between ocean life and atmospheric oxygen remained closely connected. Oxygen produced in marine environments influenced the chemistry of seawater, while ocean conditions influenced how much oxygen could move into the atmosphere. This exchange formed a continuous link between ocean and air systems. As early land ecosystems expanded, the surface of Earth became more active in oxygen production. Even though these ecosystems were simple compared to later periods in Earth's history, their contribution marked an important stage in atmospheric development. Oxygen released from land plants entered the air directly and participated in global atmospheric cycles. The burial of organic carbon in sediments on land and in shallow seas played a significant role in oxygen balance. When organic matter was buried, it removed carbon from active cycles and allowed oxygen to remain in the atmosphere for extended periods. Sedimentary basins and coastal environments became important locations for this process. Throughout the Silurian period, oxygen levels were influenced by feedback systems involving life and the environment. When photosynthetic activity increased in certain regions, oxygen production became more active. When decomposition or chemical reactions used oxygen, atmospheric levels responded through balancing processes over time. The atmosphere during the Silurian period supported the development of ecosystems that depended on oxygen for survival. These ecosystems included marine animals, early terrestrial plants, and microorganisms that lived in soil and water. Oxygen played a central role in their biological functions, including energy production and metabolic processes. Oxygen also influenced the formation of minerals in sediments and rocks. Iron-bearing minerals reacted with oxygen, creating new chemical compounds that became part of Earth's geological record. These processes preserved evidence of oxygen activity in ancient rocks formed during the Silurian period. As time moved closer to the end of the Silurian period, the continued spread of plant life on land maintained oxygen production in atmospheric systems. The combination of marine and terrestrial photosynthesis supported ongoing oxygen availability in the atmosphere. Natural cycles involving burial, decay, and chemical reactions continued to regulate oxygen presence. Atmospheric oxygen during the Silurian period existed as part of a complex and interconnected system involving oceans, land surfaces, living organisms, and geological processes. Each part of this system contributed to the overall movement and transformation of oxygen through Earth's environment. The formation of the first terrestrial ecosystems marks a long and careful process in Earth's history, when life began to move from water onto land and slowly build stable systems that could survive outside the oceans. This process did not happen quickly. It unfolded over a very long stretch of time, involving gradual changes in living organisms, changes in Earth's surface, changes in air composition, and changes in how water was held and moved across land. Early Earth was mostly dominated by oceans, and for a long time nearly all known life existed in marine environments. The land surface was mostly bare rock, dry soil in many places, and areas shaped by wind, rain, and volcanic activity without stable living cover. Before any real terrestrial ecosystems could form, the land needed to become more suitable for life. At first, the land had almost no protection from drying conditions. Sunlight reached the surface directly, and water was not held in place for long periods except in small pools or shallow streams. The atmosphere contained gases that supported life, but it was still changing over time as biological processes in the oceans influenced oxygen levels. Oxygen gradually increased in the atmosphere due to marine organisms carrying out photosynthesis. This increase made it possible for organisms to begin surviving outside water for short periods and eventually for longer durations. The first living things that moved onto land were very simple organisms. These were mostly small forms of algae, fungi-like organisms, and bacteria that could tolerate drying conditions for limited times. They often lived near shorelines in wet soil or in areas that were periodically covered by water. These early organisms did not create complex systems on land, but they began to modify the surface in small ways. They trapped moisture, broke down rock surfaces, and contributed to the formation of thin layers of soil. Soil formation was extremely important because without soil, more complex plants could not anchor themselves or obtain nutrients. As time continued, early plants began to appear on land. These plants were not tall or complex. They lacked deep roots, leaves, and strong internal structures found in later plants. Instead, they spread across damp surfaces and absorbed water directly through their outer layers. These early plants helped stabilize soil and increase the amount of organic material on land. Their presence slowly changed the surface environment. The ground became less bare and began to hold more moisture. This allowed other organisms to survive for longer periods away from water bodies. Fungi played a major role in this early stage of terrestrial ecosystem formation. Fungi developed relationships with early plants and helped break down rock and organic material into simpler nutrients. This process released minerals that plants needed to grow. Fungi also helped connect different parts of early plant communities underground. These underground connections made it easier for nutrients and water to move through the developing soil layers. The interaction between fungi and early plants contributed to the gradual expansion of life across land surfaces. As plant life expanded, more oxygen entered the atmosphere due to increased photosynthetic activity. This change supported the survival of more complex organisms on land. Small invertebrate animals began to appear in these environments. These included early arthropods that could survive in moist conditions. They fed on decaying plant material, fungi, and microorganisms. Their presence contributed to nutrient cycling in early terrestrial systems. They helped break down organic matter into smaller particles that could be reused by plants and fungi. The development of soil became more advanced during this time. Soil is not only broken rock but also includes organic material from living organisms. As plants and fungi continue to grow and die, their remains mixed with mineral particles. This created richer layers that could support more life. Water retention in soil improved, allowing plants to survive longer dry periods. Small channels formed in the ground due to water movement, and these channels help distribute nutrients across different areas. Moisture played a central role in early terrestrial ecosystem formation. Even though life was moving onto land, most early organisms still depended on water for reproduction and survival. Many early plants released spores that required water to spread and develop. These spores could be carried by wind, but they needed wet surfaces to grow. This dependence on moisture meant that early terrestrial ecosystems were concentrated in damp environments, such as near rivers, lakes, and coastal regions. Over time, plants began to develop structures that allowed them to survive more effectively on land. Some developed simple vascular systems that could transport water internally. This allowed them to grow slightly taller and access light more efficiently. Even though these plants were still small compared to later forms, their ability to move water internally helped expand their range across land. They could grow in areas that were not constantly saturated with water, which increased the spread of vegetation. As plant coverage increased, the structure of land surfaces began to change more significantly. The presence of vegetation reduced erosion caused by wind and rain. Roots, even simple ones, helped bind soil particles together. This reduced the amount of sediment being washed into rivers and oceans. At the same time, organic matter accumulation increased the fertility of land surfaces. This created a feedback process where more plants could grow, which further improved soil quality. The increase in plant life also affected atmospheric conditions. Higher levels of photosynthesis meant more carbon dioxide was being removed from the air and more oxygen was being released. These changes influenced climate patterns over long periods. Temperature regulation became more stable in regions with dense plant cover. Moisture cycles also became more consistent because plants released water vapor into the air through simple forms of transpiration. This contributed to cloud formation and rainfall distribution. Small animal life began to diversify in these environments. Early arthropods developed different feeding strategies. Some fed on live plant tissue, while others fed on decaying matter. Some lived in soil layers, while others moved across the surface. Their movement helped mix soil layers and spread organic material. This activity increased nutrient availability in the soil and supported further plant growth. Microorganisms remained essential in all parts of early terrestrial ecosystems. Bacteria played a major role in decomposition, breaking down dead material into simpler chemical forms. This allowed nutrients to return to the soil and be reused by plants. Some bacteria also formed relationships with plant roots, assisting in nutrient absorption. These microscopic processes formed the foundation of nutrient cycling on land. As plant diversity increased, early terrestrial ecosystems began to show more complex structures. Different plant types occupied different positions in the environment based on moisture levels, light availability, and soil type. Some plants preferred wetter regions while others adapted to slightly drier areas. This distribution created variation in plant coverage across landscapes. Even though all plants were still relatively simple in structure, their distribution patterns influenced how energy and nutrients moved through the system. Reproduction strategies of early plants played an important role in ecosystem expansion. Spores were released in large numbers and spread through wind and water. This allowed plants to colonize new areas that were suitable for growth. When spores landed in favorable conditions, they developed into new plant individuals. This process helped vegetation spread gradually across large land areas over long periods. As ecosystems expanded, interactions between different organisms became more frequent. Plants provided shelter and food sources for small animals. Animals contributed to soil mixing and nutrient distribution. Fungi continued to connect plant systems underground and assist in decomposition. Microorganisms maintained chemical balance in soil and water. These interactions created a stable network of life that gradually became more established across land surfaces. Environmental conditions still changed frequently during this time. Dry and wet cycles influenced how ecosystems developed in different regions. In wetter periods, plant coverage expanded more rapidly. In drier periods, only the most adaptable organisms survived in certain areas. These changes influenced how ecosystems spread and reorganized over time. Despite these fluctuations, life continued to increase its presence on land. Rock surfaces also played a role in early ecosystem formation. Weathering of rocks through water, wind, and biological activity released minerals into the environment. These minerals were essential for plant growth. As plants and fungi expanded, they increased the rate of rock breakdown. This created a gradual transformation of bare rock into soil-rich land capable of supporting more complex life. The interaction between living organisms and Earth's physical surface became more intense over time. Plants altered soil composition, fungi altered underground structures, and microorganisms influenced chemical cycles. These processes gradually shaped landscapes into systems that could sustain continuous biological activity. The early terrestrial ecosystems were still simple in structure, but were becoming more stable and widespread. As plant life continued to spread, some regions developed dense coverage of low-growing vegetation. These areas supported more animal activity and higher levels of decomposition. Other regions remained sparsely covered due to limited moisture or poor soil conditions. This variation created a mosaic of different ecosystem types across land surfaces, each shaped by local environmental conditions and biological activity. Energy flow in these early systems depended mainly on sunlight captured by plants. This energy moved through ecosystems when animals fed on plants or when organisms decomposed dead material. Even though the systems were simple, they formed continuous cycles of energy transfer. Nutrients moved between living and non-living components in a steady process that supported ongoing biological activity. Over time, the expansion of terrestrial ecosystems contributed to further changes in Earth's environment. Soil layers became deeper and more developed. Plant diversity increased slightly as new adaptations appeared. Animal life became more varied in form and behavior. Microbial communities became more specialized in different environmental niches. These changes continued to shape land surfaces into living systems that supported increasing biological complexity. The presence of life on land also influenced water systems. Rivers carried organic material from land into oceans. Lakes became enriched with nutrients from surrounding vegetation. Wetlands formed areas of high biological activity, where land and water systems interacted closely. These water bodies became important zones for the exchange of materials between terrestrial and aquatic environments. As terrestrial ecosystems continued to develop, they became more connected across regions. Plant spores and small organisms moved through wind and water, linking distant habitats. This movement allowed genetic material and biological processes to spread across large areas. Over long periods, this connectivity contributed to the expansion of life across most suitable land surfaces. The gradual establishment of terrestrial ecosystems marked a shift in how life interacted with Earth's surface. Land became a space where biological activity could occur continuously in many regions. Soil, plants, fungi, animals, and microorganisms formed interconnected systems that supported each other through nutrient exchange, energy flow, and physical interaction. The evolution of jawless fish and the first appearance of jawed fish is closely connected with the changes that took place in the oceans during the Silurian period. This period followed a time of major environmental stress in Earth's oceans, when many marine organisms were reduced in number and diversity. After this earlier reduction in life forms, marine environments slowly became more stable again, and this allowed vertebrate animals to expand in number, size, and variety. Jawless fish were already present before this period, but during the Silurian time they became more widespread, more diverse, and more specialized in their ways of living. At the same time, new groups of fish with jaws began to appear, marking a major change in vertebrate development. Jawless fish were among the earliest vertebrates to develop in Earth's oceans. These animals had simple body structures, supported by a flexible internal rod, called a notochord. They did not have true jaws, and their mouths were small openings that worked mainly for taking in water and small food particles. Their feeding methods were based on filtering material from water or sucking in fine organic matter from the sea floor. During the Silurian time, jawless fish were already spread across many marine environments, including shallow coastal waters and deeper ocean floors. Their bodies were adapted to low-energy lifestyles, which allowed them to survive in environments where food was not always abundant. In the Silurian oceans, jawless fish developed a wide range of body coverings. Some had external armour made of hard, bone-like plates that covered the head and upper parts of the body. This armour provided support for the body structure and also helped protect internal organs. Other jawless fish had softer bodies with little or no external armour, which allowed them to move more easily through water. These differences show how jawless fish adapted to different ecological conditions during the Silurian time. Some lived close to the sea floor, moving slowly and feeding on organic material that settled on sediments. Others stayed in open water and used simple fin structures to maintain position in water currents. The Silurian oceans also supported the development of more complex sensory systems in jawless fish. These fish had basic eyes that could detect light and movement in water. They also had sensory lines along their bodies that allowed them to sense changes in water pressure and movement. These sensory systems helped them detect food sources and avoid obstacles in their environment. Their nervous systems were still relatively simple, but they showed gradual development in coordination and response to environmental signals. Respiration in jawless fish during the Silurian period took place through gill structures. Water entered the mouth or surrounding openings and passed over gill surfaces, where oxygen was absorbed. This process allowed jawless fish to extract oxygen from water even in environments where oxygen levels were not very high. The Silurian oceans had varying oxygen levels in different regions, and jawless fish were able to survive in both oxygen-rich shallow waters and deeper areas with lower oxygen availability. Their ability to live in different oxygen conditions helped them spread widely across marine habitats. During the Silurian period, jawless fish also showed changes in their reproductive methods. They likely laid eggs in water, and their early development took place outside the body. Fossil evidence suggests that some jawless fish may have had different reproductive strategies depending on their environment. This flexibility in reproduction helped maintain their populations in changing marine conditions. The early life stages of these fish were likely small and vulnerable, and many individuals would have lived in protected shallow areas or among seafloor sediments during early growth. As jawless fish continued to develop during the Silurian time, new vertebrate groups began to appear. These new groups were the first fish with jaws. The appearance of jaws marked a major structural change in vertebrate evolution. Jaws allowed feeding in a new way, enabling the capture and processing of larger food items. The earliest jawed fish developed from ancestral vertebrates that were related to jawless fish. These early jawed fish are known from fossil remains that show more complex skull structures and stronger internal support systems. The first jawed fish had skeletal features that were different from jawless forms. Their skulls were more developed, with movable structures that allowed opening and closing of the mouth. This development required changes in the arrangement of bones and muscles in the head region. The jaw structure was supported by modified gill elements that became part of the feeding system. These changes allowed jawed fish to process a wider range of food types, including larger organisms, that jawless fish could not easily consume. During the Silurian period, early jawed fish began to spread in marine environments. These fish are represented in fossil records by groups that include early armored fish and early cartilaginous forms. Some of the earliest jawed fish had heavy armor plates covering parts of their bodies, especially the head and front section. This armor likely provided structural support and protection during feeding and movement. Other early jawed fish had lighter body structures made of cartilage rather than heavy bone, allowing more flexibility in swimming. The emergence of jawed fish created new patterns of interaction in marine ecosystems. Jawed fish had more active feeding methods which allowed them to capture moving prey. This changed the flow of energy in marine food systems during the Silurian time. Jawless fish continued to feed mainly on small particles and organic matter, while jawed fish could access a wider range of food sources. This difference in feeding strategies allowed both groups to exist at the same time in many environments, but with different roles in the ecosystem. The development of jaws also influenced the structure of muscles and nerves in early jawed fish. Muscles in the head region became more specialized for opening and closing the mouth. Nerve control over these muscles also became more precise, allowing better coordination during feeding. These changes required modifications in the skull structure, which gradually became more complex over time. The Silurian fossil record shows early stages of these structural changes in several primitive jawed fish groups. The environment of the Silurian oceans provided conditions that supported the spread of both jawless and jawed fish. Sea levels were relatively high, creating large, shallow marine areas. These shallow waters contained many habitats such as reefs, sandy bottoms, and muddy sea floors. Jawless fish were common in many of these environments, especially in areas with soft sediments. Jawed fish appeared in similar regions, but also expanded into more active swimming zones in open water. The variety of marine habitats allowed both groups to develop in different directions. Jawless fish during the Silurian period also showed continued changes in body size and shape. Some species remained very small, while others became larger and developed stronger armor structures. The presence of armor in some jawless fish groups suggests adaptation to environmental pressures, such as predation and physical disturbance in shallow waters. These armored fish often had thick plates on the head region and sometimes along the back. The structure of these plates varied depending on species and environment. The first jawed fish also showed variation in body design. Some early forms had elongated bodies with strong swimming ability, while others were more compact and heavily armored. The development of paired fins in jawed fish provided better control of movement in water. These fins allowed more precise turning and stability during swimming. This improvement in movement supported more active hunting and feeding behavior. During the Silurian period, the relationship between jawless and jawed fish influenced the overall structure of marine life. Jawless fish remained important in many ecosystems due to their large numbers and wide distribution. Jawed fish, although fewer in number at first, introduced new feeding methods and gradually expanded their presence in marine environments. Over time, this led to increased diversity in vertebrate life forms. Fossil evidence from Silurian rocks shows early stages of this transition. Remains of jawless fish are found in many sediment layers, showing their long presence in marine ecosystems. Fossils of early jawed fish appear later in the Silurian record, indicating their gradual emergence. These fossils include skull fragments, armor plates, and fin structures that show early development of jaw systems. The development of jaws required changes in internal skeletal support. In jawless fish, the skull structure was relatively simple and supported basic feeding functions. In jawed fish, the skull became more complex, with multiple elements working together to support biting and chewing actions. These structural changes were important for the expansion of vertebrate feeding strategies. The Silurian oceans also provided stable chemical conditions that supported marine life development. Changes in ocean chemistry, including oxygen levels and mineral availability, influenced the growth of skeletal structures in fish. Increased availability of minerals allowed the development of harder body parts in both jawless armored fish and jawed fish with skeletal elements. This contributed to better preservation of fossils from this period. Jawless fish continued to exist alongside jawed fish without disappearing during the Silurian period. They maintained their ecological roles and continued to occupy many marine habitats. Their long evolutionary history allowed them to adapt to stable feeding strategies that required little energy. Jawed fish expanded into more active roles, but jawless fish remained a significant part of marine ecosystems. The early appearance of jawed fish during the Silurian period marked a gradual shift in vertebrate development. This shift did not happen suddenly, but occurred over long periods of small changes in anatomy and function. Fossils show intermediate forms that combine features of jawless and jawed fish. These transitional forms help show how jaws developed from earlier skeletal structures.